Urban Planning During Harappan Civilization, A Modern View. Chapter 1. Introduction to Harappan Civilization. Introduction. The Harappan civilization, also known as the Indus Valley Civilization, was one of the world's earliest urban societies, contemporary with Bronze Age Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. Flourishing around 2500–1900 BCE in South Asia, it was remarkable for its extensive geographic scope, innovative city planning, and sophisticated culture devoid of obvious monarchs or monumental temples. First discovered in the 1920s, this civilization has since challenged historians to reconstruct its history and societal organization from archaeological evidence alone, as its script remains undeciphered. In this chapter, we present a comprehensive introduction to the Harappan civilization. Section 1.1 provides a historical overview, outlining its discovery, major characteristics, and historical development. Section 1.2 examines the chronological framework and geographic extent of the Indus Valley Civilization, incorporating recent research that refines our understanding of its timeline and reach. In 1.3, we discuss the significance of Harappan urban planning in the context of ancient societies, highlighting how its cities were laid out and why this matters for the study of early urbanism. Section 1.4 outlines the research objectives and methodology for studying this civilization, the questions scholars ask and the interdisciplinary methods they use to investigate them. Finally, 1.5 reviews the sources of information available, archaeological and otherwise, and the limitations researchers face, such as gaps in the evidence and the undeciphered Indus script. Throughout, we integrate historians' views, archaeological findings, and visual aids, maps, site photographs, tables, to provide a well-rounded understanding of the Harappan civilization. The Indus Valley Civilization, VK, often called the Harappan civilization after its type site Harappa, was the earliest known urban culture of the Indian subcontinent. It emerged during the Bronze Age, roughly in the late 3rd millennium BCE, and flourished contemporaneously with the great riverine civilizations of Mesopotamia, Tigris-Euphrates, and Egypt, Nile. In fact, the Indus civilization is counted among the world's 3 earliest civilizations in antiquity. What distinguishes the Harappan culture is its impressive scope and unique characteristics. It covered a larger geographic area than either Mesopotamia or Egypt, included hundreds of settlements, and featured cities with extraordinary uniformity in planning and material culture. Discovery and early investigations. For millennia, the achievements of the Harappan civilization lay buried and forgotten. Prior to the 1920s, most scholars believed that Indian civilization began with the Vedic Aryans around 1500 BCE, and that earlier there were only primitive communities. This assumption was dramatically overturned by archaeological discoveries in the early 20th century. In 1921, archaeologist Dayaram Sani, working under the British India's Archaeological Survey, excavated Harappa in Punjab, present-day Pakistan, uncovering evidence of an ancient city. Shortly after, in 1922, R.D. Banerjee discovered the site of Mohenjo-Daro in Sindh, also in present-day Pakistan. These two discoveries, led by Indian and British scholars, revealed that a sophisticated urban civilization had existed in the Indus Valley thousands of years earlier than anyone had imagined. News of the find spread quickly and caused a sensation in the scholarly world, as historian John Marshall, Director General of Archaeology at the time, proclaimed, "India's earliest civilization had been found, contemporary with the Bronze Age cultures of Mesopotamia." The Indus civilization forced a complete rewriting of South Asian prehistory, demonstrating that complex urban life in India predated the arrival of the Indo-Aryans. After the initial discovery, excavations and studies continued apace. Marshall and other archaeologists like E.J.H. Mackay and Sir John Hubert Marshall, not to be confused with John Marshall, excavated extensively at Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa in the 1920s and 1930s, documenting well-built brick structures, city grids, and numerous artifacts, including stone seals with mysterious inscriptions. In the 1940s, Sir Mortimer Wheeler directed further excavations, introducing more systematic stratigraphic methods and publicity to the Indus sites. Each new season of digs expanded knowledge of Harappan life, while also raising new questions, especially about the undeciphered script found on many seals. The partition of India in 1947 split the core Harappan sites between the new nations of Pakistan, which got Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, and most known sites, and India. This spurred both countries to intensify archaeological surveys. Pakistani archaeologists explored the Ghaggar Hakra, Sarasvati, river region in Cholistan, uncovering many new settlements, while Indian archaeologists excavated sites in Gujarat, Punjab, and Rajasthan, such as Kalibangan, Lothal, and later Dholavira. Over time, the tally of Harappan sites grew into the thousands, greatly enlarging our perspective on the civilization's extent and regional variations. Major characteristics of the Harappan civilization. At its height, often termed the mature Harappan period, circa 2600 to 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley civilization exhibited a number of striking features that set it apart from other early civilizations. Urban centers and planning. The Harappans built well-planned cities with rectilinear layouts. The two largest cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, each covered around 100 to 200 hectares and were laid out on grid plans, with streets running in cardinal directions. These cities were divided into a raised citadel area, possibly for public buildings, and a larger lower town for residences, both carefully organized. Dozens of smaller towns, example Lothal, Dholavira, Kalibangan, Rakhigarhi, followed similar town planning principles, indicating some form of standardized approach to city design across the vast region. This phenomenon suggested to early researchers that the Indus civilization had an efficient municipal governance and possibly a central authority or widely shared culture that emphasized orderliness in settlement construction. Advanced infrastructure. Harappan cities featured sophisticated civil engineering. Perhaps most remarkable were their sanitation and water management systems. Nearly every city had an extensive network of covered drains running along the streets, connected to bathing areas and latrines in houses, to channel wastewater out of the city. Many houses had bathrooms with drains connected to the street sewers, and some buildings even had brick-lined wells to supply water. The famous Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, Figure 1.1, a large watertight basin built of baked bricks, is the earliest known public water tank in the ancient world, likely used for ritual bathing or civic purposes. The emphasis on cleanliness and public health is evidenced by the uniform implementation of sanitation. Even small or peripheral houses were linked to the drainage grid, underscoring that hygiene was a citywide priority. These amenities were far more advanced than any found in contemporary urban sites in the Middle East, and even more efficient than those in many areas of Pakistan and India today. As one source notes, highlighting the forward-looking nature of Harappan infrastructure. Standardization and technology. The Harappans achieved a high degree of standardization in their material culture, which hints at strong interconnectedness or central regulation. Archaeologists have found uniformly made bricks, typically in a 1:4 ratio by thickness-width-length, suggesting a common standardized blueprint for construction across different cities. Likewise, the system of weights and measures was standardized. Stone cubes and chert weights of specific sizes have been excavated, indicating a precise binary weighting system used for trade and taxation. The presence of identical seals, small carved steatite seals with animal motifs in script, at distant sites also points to a shared administrative or economic system. In terms of technology, the Harappans were skilled in pottery, mass-produced wheel-made pottery, often red ware with black designs. Metallurgy, they cast bronze tools and figurines, for example the famous bronze dancing girl figurine, and bead-making, carnelian and faience beads found in abundance. They built kilns for firing bricks and pottery, and their craft production was often on an industrial scale in cities like Mohenjo-Daro, famous for bead factories. This uniform material culture implies effective communication and possibly movement of artisans or goods across the region. Economic life and trade. The Indus Valley economy was based on a mix of agriculture, pastoralism, and trade. Harappan farmers grew staples like wheat and barley, as well as pulses, sesame, and cotton. In fact, the earliest evidence of cotton textiles comes from Harappan contexts. They kept zebu cattle, water buffalo, goats, sheep, and chickens, the latter possibly domesticated in the region. Surplus grain was likely stored in large granaries. Multiple brick platform structures identified in Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro have traditionally been called granaries, though their exact function is still debated, e.g., Knoyer's suggestion that Mohenjo-Daro's Great Granary was actually a public assembly hall. The Indus cities did not use coinage, but trade was facilitated by barter and the use of seals for marking goods. Long-distance trade was a key feature. Archaeological evidence and Mesopotamian cuneiform texts indicate that the Harappans had commercial ties with regions as far west as Mesopotamia and the Arabian Gulf. Mesopotamian records refer to a land called Meluha, which most scholars identify with the Indus region, noted for exporting products like timber, ivory, gold, carnelian, and lapis lazuli. Harappan seals and beads have been found at Mesopotamian sites like and Tel Lagash, and conversely, Mesopotamian cylinder seals and carved materials have been unearthed in Indus sites, indicating a robust exchange. The Indus people also established trading colonies or enclaves. For instance, the coastal site of Lothal in Gujarat had a rectangular basin structure interpreted by some as a dockyard for seagoing vessels, suggesting organized maritime trade. Overall, the Indus economy was vibrant and far-reaching, integrating a huge area from the highlands of Baluchistan to the coastal peninsulas. Social organization and culture. One of the enduring mysteries of the Harappan civilization is its socio-political structure. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, Harappan cities lack ostentatious palaces, grand temples, or obvious royal tombs. There are no large statues of kings, no inscriptions glorifying rulers, in fact, no readable inscriptions at all, and no clear depictions of warfare or conquest. This absence of elite markers has led to various hypotheses. Perhaps the Indus society was unusually egalitarian, or ruled by merchant councils rather than god kings, or perhaps authority was exercised by a class of priests or administrators who left fewer conspicuous symbols. The standardized artifacts, seals, weights, pottery styles, imply some centralized control or widespread cooperation, but the identity of the rulers or governing system remains unknown. Some scholars argue there may have been a single state, or at least a confederation tying the cities together, due to the civilization's unity and material culture. Others propose a network of regional capitals, e.g. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira, each perhaps governing its hinterland, with shared culture but political autonomy. A radical view even suggests a stateless society with relatively equal status among inhabitants, though the city size and coordination seem to argue against a completely horizontal social structure. Culturally, the Harappans were not devoid of religion or art, but their expression was subtle. They produced many small terracotta figurines, often of females, possibly mother goddess figures, and of animals, and some striking stone statuettes, like the bearded priest-king figurine from Mohenjo-Daro, which hint at aesthetic and possibly religious practices. The famous seals often depict animals, bulls, elephants, rhinoceros, etc., and composite creatures, as well as enigmatic motifs like the unicorn, a one-horned bovine, and scenes of possible cult significance. A horned deity sitting in a yogic posture surrounded by animals, dubbed the Pashupati or Proto-Shiva by some. These suggest elements of Harappan belief systems, possibly early forms of Indian religious themes, but without decipherable texts, interpretations remain speculative. What can be said is that the Harappans had a rich, symbolic life and likely practiced ritual bathing, given structures like the Great Bath and bathing platforms, and veneration of certain animals or natural forces, foreshadowing later South Asian religious concepts. Writing system. The Indus Valley Civilization developed a form of writing, often called the Indus script, which remains one of the world's last major undeciphered scripts. Inscribed characters, typically about 5 to 7 in a sequence, appear on seals, pottery, and other objects. They are pictographic or abstract signs. Over 400 individual signs are cataloged. Despite many attempts by epigraphists and linguists over the decades, no consensus decipherment has been achieved, largely due to the brevity of the texts and lack of a bilingual inscription. The language encoded is unknown. Hypotheses range from a Dravidian language, as supported by some linguists and the noted epigraphist Iravatham Mahadevan, to an early Indo-Iranian language, or even that the symbols might not encode language at all, a controversial suggestion by some researchers like Farmer et al., that it might be more of a non-linguistic symbol system. The failure to decipher the Indus script is a significant hindrance to fully understanding the Harappans. It means we have no direct records of their names for themselves or their cities, no king lists, no religious texts or laws, in contrast to Mesopotamia or Egypt, where written records richly inform history. Thus, nearly all knowledge of Harappan civilization comes from archaeological evidence alone, not written history. Historical development and periodization. The Indus civilization did not appear overnight. It was the product of a long local development intertwined with external influences. Archaeologists divide its history into several broad phases. See Table 1.1. The roots of the Harappan culture can be traced back to early farming communities in South Asia, such as Mehrgarh in Balochistan, Pakistan, which was occupied as early as the 7th millennium BCE. At Mehrgarh, archaeologists have documented the domestication of plants, e.g. wheat, barley, and animals, cattle, sheep, goats, along with the gradual emergence of crafts like pottery and beadmaking. This Neolithic culture set the stage for later urbanization. By the early Harappan period, c. 3300–2600 BCE, regional agrarian villages in the greater Indus region began expanding and interacting. Distinct localized cultures, such as the Amri, Kotdiji, Sothi Siswal, and Hakra cultures, show increasing complexity. Fortified towns, craft specialization, and long-distance trade of semi-precious stones and metals are evidenced in this era. For instance, at sites like Kotdiji and Ramandari, we see planned settlements with mud brick walls and early signs of what would become Harappan material culture. According to recent research, populations were transitioning from villages to cities during this phase. The use of seals and script likely began in the late early Harappan, as inscribed ceilings have been found in levels just prior to urbanization, e.g., at Harappa's Ravi phase, c. 3300–2800 BCE. Overall, the early Harappan phase laid the groundwork by establishing trade networks, including contacts with Mesopotamia, as some early Harappan artifacts are found in Sumer, and technologies, such as metallurgy and perhaps wheeled transport, that would enable urban growth. The mature Harappan period, c. 2600 to 1900 BCE, corresponds to the high tide of the civilization. This is when the great cities like Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dholavira, Kalibangan, and others thrived. Sometime around 2600 BCE, multiple smaller regional cultures coalesced into a more uniform civilization, marked by the hallmarks described earlier: city planning, standard weights, prolific trade, etc. Over 1,000 Harappan settlements from this period have been identified across Pakistan and northwestern India, though not all were cities. Many were farming villages or pastoral camps that were part of the broader Harappan cultural sphere. The civilization during these centuries was remarkably stable and prosperous. There is little evidence of armies or warfare, no depictions of chariots in battle or conquered peoples, unlike Mesopotamia or Egypt, which has led to much fascination about how such a large civilization could be so apparently peaceable. It's possible that conflicts did exist but were not monumentalized in art, or that internal conflict was minimal due to some effective social mechanisms. Some researchers have gone so far as to characterize the Indus realm as a peaceful realm that developed and thrived without warfare or violent competition, although this view is subject to debate. By around 1900 BCE, the civilization began to change significantly. This marks the start of the late Harappan or post-urban Harappan phase, circa 1900–1300 BCE. There is clear evidence that the major cities were progressively abandoned or at least saw drastic reductions in population. Mohenjo-Daro, for example, appears to have been largely abandoned by 1700 BCE. The final layers of many cities show signs of dilapidation: streets clogged with debris, a decline in craft uniformity, and fewer long-distance traded goods. In some former urban areas, small farming communities or squatter occupations lingered on amid the ruins. In peripheral regions, Local cultures that had earlier been under Harappan influence started to emerge distinctly. Archaeologists identify cultures like Cemetery H in Punjab, Jukar in Sindh, and late Harappan Chalcolithic cultures in Gujarat. However, the late Harappan is not simply an end. Some elements of Harappan tradition continued. People still used evolved forms of the Indus script for a time, and some settlements, like smaller villages in the upper Sarasvati Gagar region and in Kachha, Gujarat, continued Harappan ways of life into the second millennium BCE, albeit at a simpler scale. It's even posited that certain communities of Harappan descendants in the south, e.g., Rangpur or Daimabad in Gujarat, lasted until around 1300 to 1200 BCE, overlapping with the early Iron Age in India. Nonetheless, by 1300 BCE, the distinctive urban characteristics of the civilization were gone.